Welcome back to Kings of the North. Doug Lesmerises along with you. Two guests today that will be joining us. First up, Tyler Shoemaker, your friend and mine from the Friday betting show, Bets of the North. We're not talking betting, though. We're going to talk his power ratings, because when he and I had a good week last week. If you're not watching the Friday betting show, and you even if you don't want to bet, you should be watching it. He has his own power ratings that then lead him in directions with the bets. So I don't want to every single Tuesday come on here and talk about the college football playoff rankings, but ranking number 2 is coming out tonight. We had Brian Fremeau last week, who's an analytics guy. I wanted to get like a Vegas guy on to just talk about what they think of the playoff, what they think of how these ratings and rankings should be done. And I just want all of us, it aggravates me. So people throw out power polls sometimes. I just wanted to bring a little context to that discussion of like, when we're rating and ranking college football teams, like, what are we doing? What are we actually doing there? What are we trying to accomplish? I think you have to ask yourself, what are we trying to accomplish before you actually go about asking, are we accomplishing it? So Tishu's going to help us with that. He has a difference. He has a power poll and a resume ranking that are very different, and I think that will be informative to you. Then Dan Wetzel's going to come on. I really want to talk about Deion Sanders and Colorado and the transformation Colorado has made this season to be right in the thick of the Big 12 playoff race. With the way things stand now, BYU playing a tight one last weekend. There's a lot of people who have changed their Big 12 playoff picks to Colorado, that Deion Sanders, Coach Prime in year 2, would be in the playoff. It would be a gigantic story for college football, but it would have been earned. We were at a point with Deion Sanders is coming in. They're getting so many transfers. They're not doing high school recruiting. Are they being fair to everybody? They were kind of getting a lot of attention last year when they had a good start and a bad finish. I want to reset that and what has been learned by the success of Colorado this year. And I just want to reset Deion Sanders a little bit. I have some numbers that I think you'll want to know about when it comes to this Colorado roster. And does it require a reevaluation by all of us? And then I want to talk about Kirby Smart with Dan. So Dan Wetzel, we're going to talk about Deion Sanders and Kirby Smart, because I do think it's sort of like just different ways of going about your business as a college football head coach. And we brushed on this yesterday when it came out about Kirby Smart calling his player who was celebrating with Ole Miss fans an idiot, but just like where Georgia is and where Georgia may be in the conversation the rest of this season, and prepping ourselves for that. Then we will have Block and Punt of the week, and we'll have the Overrated Southern Team of the week, and a couple news and notes at the end. But I want to start off with upsets, because we have to make sure we have the facts before we have all these conversations about how you should take into account some of these upsets, especially in the SEC. So again, I'm not doing anything that somebody with 5 minutes and a legal pad couldn't do, but you have lives and I don't. So I'm doing it for us. And this is what I did. I kind of went through all the losses in the AP Top 25 poll. We just have to have a guideline. How many of them were to unranked teams, and who's having those unranked losses? And as a reminder, for our conversations, especially North and South, which is what I like to do here, what's really been chaotic this year and what hasn't been. So let's talk about the losses. In the AP Top 25 this year, the current Top 25 that came out on Sunday, those 25 teams have a total of 36 losses this season. 11 of those losses are to teams. I'll slide, Mike. I'll slide. Can't have my head behind the graphic. That's my bad. 11 of those losses are to teams who are currently unranked. Those 11 losses by teams who are currently unranked, 8 are by Southern teams and 3 are by Northern teams. So I've been having a lot of handle your business conversations. This is what I mean. This is what I mean in a handle your business conversation. It's not happening up here as much. It's just not. So when we run through what has happened here, these are the AP Top 25 teams with unranked losses this year. Number 6, Tennessee lost to Arkansas. Number 8, Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois. Number 9, Alabama lost to Vanderbilt. Number 10, Ole Miss lost to Kentucky. Number 12, Miami lost to Louisville. Number 15, Texas A&M lost to South Carolina. No, Miami lost to Georgia Tech. My bad. Number 12, Miami lost to Georgia Tech. Number 17, Clemson lost to Louisville. Number 18, Colorado lost to Nebraska. Number 20, Kansas State lost to Houston. Number 21, LSU. God, I can't even remember who they lost to. They lost to a bunch of people. I don't really care. And number 25, Tulane lost. So those are the teams that have lost. And I feel like people want to have chaos conversations, but it's really an SEC chaos conversation because we're talking about those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Yeah, 11 teams that have lost, that are in the top 25 that have lost to an unranked team. How many of them are in the SEC? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them are in the SEC. How many of them are in the Big Ten, for instance? None. So that's where the conflict in some of these discussions come. Because the fact that there are 4 Big Ten teams ranked in the top 5 right now, Oregon is undefeated. Number 2, Ohio State only lost to number 1. Number 4, Penn State only lost to number 2, and Indiana hasn't lost. So would it be better? Would people feel better about things if Ohio State or Oregon or Penn State or Indiana had suffered an upset loss? Would they feel like that evened things out a little bit? Because then the question comes back, when you have an upset loss, does that mean your conference is so great and strong, or does it mean that your top teams are stumbling? I think it means your top teams are stumbling. I do not look at losses to Arkansas, Kentucky, and Vanderbilt and think to myself, wow, and South Carolina, and think to myself, wow, look at that. Look at those guys. Because the Big Ten has those teams. They do. They have those teams. But USC hasn't managed to pull off any of those upsets like that. Or Penn State didn't let them. Penn State was on the edge against USC and didn't let it happen. Ohio State was on the edge against Nebraska and didn't let it happen. Oregon was on the edge against Boise State in a non-conference game and didn't let it happen. The LSU unranked loss is to USC, right? So LSU lost a game that Penn State wouldn't allow happen. Like, those are the kind of things that I want to talk about. And so I just want us to understand what's going on, because the real deal is that the SEC has suffered more upset losses than any team in the country, than any conference in the country this year. And some people will want to use that as a sign of SEC strength, because then it does give their lesser teams good wins. And then their lesser teams get into the top 25 and then give their higher ranked teams more top 25 wins. But why are those teams in there to begin with? Because the best teams managed to lose. If Illinois had upset Penn State, Illinois would be in the top 25, but they're not, right? So I just wanted to give some facts. This is a little more on the edge. This is not quite as meaningful, I think. But I went through all the conferences. How many teams have winning conference records? How many have losing conference records? How many have 500 conference records? And how many games have there been where a team with a 500 record or a losing record have beaten a team with a winning record? So these are sort of maybe more mini upsets. But in the SEC, there have been 3, but they've been gigantic. Kentucky over Ole Miss, Arkansas over Tennessee, Vanderbilt over Alabama. In the Big Ten, there have been 4, but they've been less seismic, and they're all Iowa and Minnesota losing. Michigan State beat Iowa, UCLA beat Iowa, Rutgers beat Minnesota, Michigan beat Minnesota. In the Big 12, there have been 4. Kansas over Iowa State was big. Houston over Kansas State was big. Like, this is like really meaningful stuff. And then the ACC, there have been 4. Virginia over Pitt really mattered, and a couple of other ones are like Georgia Tech losing and then Stanford over Syracuse. So it's not that there have been 0 upsets in the other conferences. It's not that the bottom half of the other leagues are incapable of winning games, because you can look at Michigan State and Rutgers and UCLA, and believe it or not, Michigan's like in the bottom half of the Big Ten. And you can look at Kansas and Houston and Baylor and Cincinnati, and you can look at Stanford and Virginia and teams like that, and you can find them winning games. It's just not against the best teams. So in conclusion, It's a lot of jibber jabber. This is the conclusion. By the numbers, by the facts, the best SEC teams have been the most vulnerable. The best Big Ten teams have not been vulnerable. And I think that means the best Big Ten teams are better than the best SEC teams. I do. That's what I think that means. But I think actually the vulnerability has helped the SEC by getting more teams into the bottom of the top 25 and puffing up those schedule strengths and winning records. Does that all make sense? There's a lot of stuff in there, but it's like, what are we talking about? We just have not seen upsets. The four biggest upsets that have mattered in the sport so far are by far Arkansas over Tennessee, Northern Illinois over Notre Dame, Vanderbilt over Miami, and Kentucky over Ole Miss. And it's just like Notre Dame's not in a conference, so that can sort of leak away a little bit. It doesn't help that's the worst loss. It doesn't help Northern Illinois in the top 25 that they beat Notre Dame because Notre Dame's on its own and because Northern Illinois is not a factor. But all the other things have helped the SEC. That's my point. So when you hear somebody talking about it, the SEC has had more upsets than the Big Ten. Now you interpret if that's good or bad. And I would say it's good for the Big Ten, but I'm not sure that's what everybody else is saying. All right. What happens when Doug has a little bit of time to do like some grade school math? Let's get to Tyler Shoemaker. He does big math. We do it every Friday morning on Bets of the North, where we are ahead for the year, but we want to use his expertise to just help you understand the context of how we think about rating and ranking college football teams. It's coming up right now on Kings of the North. Tyler Shoemaker here on Kings of the North. You can catch him every Friday on Bets of the North, but we're bringing in here T-Shoe not to be a gambling expert, not to come here just because you were 4-0 on your best bets this past weekend, not to come here just because we hit our $500 real money play. Maybe people want to go find that on Friday, every Friday when we do that gambling show, but we want to talk about your power ratings, because when you are coming up with best bets and the way you analyze games, this is all based on your T-Shoe index ratings that you've created. Is that correct? That's how you analyze the sport primarily, from your own ratings?
Yeah, 100%. That's the baseline of every, betting decision I make. But as we've talked about in the past, I think there's a ton of value, even if you don't bet a single penny on college football, even if you hate gambling altogether. I think there's still value in at least knowing and keeping an eye on power ratings like mine. There are others out there, but I think it can really help you contextualize the sport. And a lot of times, you can just check me out on X and see the mentions of people yelling at me because right now I've got Notre Dame number 1. So that may not match what you have seen, but it just kind of provides context of like, okay, my eyes tell me this, but the data is saying another thing. And I get that's why they play the games on the field. It's not played on a computer, but I think it does really help provide context to what you're seeing on the field on Saturdays.
Yeah. So do you like rankings, hate rankings that are not power polls? Do you love power polls more? What is your preferred method of when you see a list of teams? What does it make it happen inside of you?
I don't love or hate any of them more than the other necessarily, as long as the objective is clearly stated ahead of time. Because if you're trying to tell me I'm trying to rank the best teams, and then you do it as a resume ranking, that's when I have a problem with it. Like, are we doing a resume or are we doing the best teams? Because those are often not the same things, as we've seen in a crazy sport like college football.
Right. So what do you think the playoff rankings should be? Should the playoff rankings be any component of a predictive power poll, or should they be almost entirely resume?
I think resume, because the results on the field have to matter. I'm the first to admit that. So I do think they should be resume driven, but I also think there needs to be like a common sense, like who's better component to that. Now, that's not to use the Nick Saban argument, when Alabama got left out and he's like, well, we'd be favored over all these teams. Like that's not what I'm saying necessarily. But I do think you need to combine, which is what I do. I put out 2 different ranking graphics every week. One is just purely resume, which is by my numbers is your average opponent power rating to date, and then your win-loss record against that schedule. You get penalized 7 points for a loss. So that's how my resume rankings shake out. But then I also do a resume plus power, which is kind of probably how I would vote, at least from a methodology standpoint, in a college football playoff poll, which is I take the resume, but then I also, at the end of that, I then add on your power rating, and that helps kind of shake things out of like, okay, teams like, maybe BYU, who are not very highly power rated, can still find themselves in, a resume and power ranking. I've got them at number 13 in my resume plus power ranking. So that's an example of a team that, that to me, 13 for BYU feels about right. Like they're undefeated, but I don't think anyone would argue they're better than a lot of the teams ahead of them.
Yeah. Okay. Now we're getting the hairs on my arm are starting to stand up a little bit. Because I will say, and I wanted to talk about this with somebody who sort of views the sport through this kind of lens. We had Brian Fremeau last week, who does a lot of analytical stuff like drive to drive, that kind of thing. You have this metric that you've created, but it's for sort of a betting line. So it's fair. Like you're viewing it more through a betting lens, which is different than somebody who views it through an analytics lens, purely analytics, and isn't thinking about predictive betting. Is that fair to say that those lenses are slightly different?
They are slightly different. Again, if your objective is we need to rank these teams based on what's happened thus far versus we need to rank these teams based on what would happen if they played on this coming Saturday, I think those are 2 different things. So I think you're right. I think there's 2 different methodologies there of how to do it.
Yeah. Okay. Because here's the thing where my hackles get raised a little bit, right? Is trying to figure out what the Vegas line should be on a game, I think is just an entirely different exercise than who deserves to be ranked where they are. And in every other sport, we're able to differentiate those 2 things. The NFL doesn't put teams in the playoff based on what the Vegas line would be of if these 2 teams played on a neutral field. They just go by your record. And the NFL is designed for lesser teams the year before to have an easier schedule. But they don't talk about schedule strength and power ratings. They literally go by your record. That's how you get in the playoffs. Now, when you get in the playoffs, maybe the 5 seed is favored over the 4 seed because of power ratings, but it doesn't determine who gets in. So sometimes the idea of that power polls should have almost any influence on who gets in drives me crazy a little bit. But the problem is we have 134 teams and they're not all playing each other. And it's completely different from the NFL. But that is a different problem. So, but it's also hard. Like, would you say that it should only be record? No, I wouldn't say it should only be record, but I do think it should be more resume than power poll. If I like the idea of blending, but every other sport in the world is resume. Like that's what your record is your resume. Yep. There's nothing else that matters. This is the only sport where this happens. And there are some shows who and I think the context is really important, which is what you said. There are some places where I think they try to substitute a power poll for a ranking or try to claim that it's better or smarter. But as you said, it's just trying to do a different thing. Mm-hmm. So you have to contextualize, but I don't care what the Vegas line of a game would be when I'm trying to rank teams and decide who should be in the playoff. I honestly don't. So I don't know. Now I'm mad. I didn't mean to bring on who to yell at Vegas. I don't want to yell at Vegas. They build a bunch of casinos based on the backs of idiots like me. So you know what I mean?
No, I do. I know exactly what you mean. I think where we could meet in the middle on this is, okay, if you wanted to just say, okay, let's look at my resume rankings, which has my resume rankings have BYU number 2, like Indiana number 3, that sort of thing, which is probably more in line with your thinking because of their record. Those, at least in my numbers, my resume rankings are derived from your average opponent power rating. That's how we know what your schedule has been based on my power rating. So that to me, I think that's where we can meet in the middle of like, okay, if you want to do it that way, that's fine. We can put BYU at number 2, but with the understanding that they're number 2 because their schedule, based on my numbers, my power ratings, has allowed them to be ranked that. I think that's where we can meet in the middle there.
Yeah, I think we can. So but one of the, I mean, like, it's like, why are we doing this? Just to shout about rankings. So it's college football playoff rankings. People know are coming out for the second time tonight, but I just want to help people differentiate the contexts when they hear other people talk about the sport in this way. And I am very interested in making sure the committee doesn't leak too far into a power rating, right? Because then it's like, then we're just dispatching with Ole Miss losing to Kentucky.
Yep. No,
where
100%.
In the past, we've been in situations where a single bad loss has ruined a team's season. I don't think it should ruin your season, but I think we're creeping toward it almost doesn't matter. And that's what I don't think you get a mulligan. So there is somewhere in between. It's a fluke. It maybe is not representative of who you are, but it's also 1/12 of what you've done this year. Sorry, yeah. We can't ignore it. So, but the point that I really want to make is I want to compare your power ratings to your resume rankings and then your blended. So let's show if we can talk about what your top 12 of your power ratings would be. And maybe you can run through these teams and like how you arrived at this. And the one surprising thing is off the top in your power ratings, Notre Dame is number 1. And they have this loss to Northern Illinois that is probably the worst loss in college football this year. How do your power ratings account for that and still have Notre Dame at number 1?
Yeah. And that's the point I was going to make as you brought up. You know, you don't get a mulligan in terms of your resume and how we should evaluate teams for a playoff situation. I 100% agree with that. Notre Dame should not be forgiven by the committee for losing to Northern Illinois, because to your point, that's 1/12 of what you've done. However, from the power rating standpoint of, okay, Notre Dame's going to show up on the field on Saturday. How good are they? I think they're appropriately rated. And I said this on our betting show last week. I'm sure there are a ton of people that would roll their eyes and vehemently disagree with this. I literally do not factor in the Northern Illinois loss whatsoever to their power rating now, because it is such an outlier statistically that like it's when I put that data point in there, it brings Notre Dame down so far that it's just unrealistic. And you and I have made money this year betting on Notre Dame because the market doesn't understand that, and they're still holding that against Notre Dame. And again, from a resume standpoint, totally fair. From a betting power rating standpoint, it is not informative whatsoever of who they're going to be in coming weeks.
Yeah. And you have Ole Miss 4th, and Ole Miss has 2 losses.
Yep.
Right. But again, it's a Kentucky loss and then a road loss late at LSU. Right. So it's a similar thing here that just in your power poll, you are not holding sort of a fluke loss against a team like almost at all. Have you taken out the Ole Miss Kentucky loss as well, pretty much?
No. And here's I'm glad you said this, because this is a point that needs made. Good power ratings anyway. I can speak for myself. My power ratings, win-loss is not factored in at all. Like I don't have like a little box I check whether they won the game or not. It's literally just performance based. So you can, on a week-to-week basis, your power rating can increase while losing a game and vice versa. Yeah. You can win a game and your power rating can go down because you had a bad performance against a subpar team. So I think that point is worth making as well. But to answer your question, no, the Kentucky game is in the Ole Miss.
Okay.
Kind of my philosophy with, especially when we're talking about the top of the sport, I really only care about what you've done against Power 4 opponents, because I think that's going to be way more representative of, if we're talking about, especially now that we're in conference play and moving towards the playoff, like those data points are way more representative than what you did against Kent State or Akron, early in the season.
Okay. So again, the TCU power poll: Notre Dame, Ohio State, Oregon, Ole Miss, Alabama 5, Texas, Georgia, Indiana, Clemson, Penn State 10, Tennessee 11, South Carolina 12. It's a little SEC heavy for me too. Shoot, I'm counting up 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 of the 12 is the SEC. Okay, you're keeping it real. I get it. But I would have. So before we get to your resume ranking, and this is similar to the conversation we've had with Brian Fremeau, because again, like his drive to drive metrics say the same thing about Ole Miss. I think you could argue if you are dominating games and having more success over the course of a game than your opponents, but you still have 2 losses, I almost think you can ding a team more for that, because it's like you're good and you're finding ways to lose. What am I supposed to do with you now? Right. So I'm not saying that should, because that's a different argument. Yep. But from a resume standpoint, I kind of don't care how good you could be or how much you should win. There's a lot of coulds and shoulds in power poll sometimes, when resume to me is what you did. And in the end, again, it's fair to say power polls, and again, this is a part of the context people have to know. A power poll is future, is more predictive.
Yep.
A resume ranking is past, what has happened. And I think, again, in this sport, if we start trying to put teams in the playoff based on what you think will happen in the future, we're dead. Yep. Because nobody would have put Ohio State versus Miami in 2002. Ohio State was undefeated. I don't know where they were in people's power polls, but I bet you they weren't number 2 in the country. And then you lose that game for a team that actually on the field consistently found a way to win, and I think earned that opportunity, maybe despite not having a great power ranking. So anyway, you agree with that? It should be more about the past than the future.
Agreed. Yeah, and you said 2 words that I think sum this whole thing up, and that's earned and deserved. And like I agree that those words should be what we base the playoff picture on, more so than like what would happen in the future, power rating exercise. So I think those are the words, like when you're thinking of how the committee should vote or what we should do, like I think deserved and earned are correct.
Yeah.
I also, for instance, I got yelled at by someone on TikTok because, you see, I've got Ole Miss number 4 in my power rating, but in my resume rankings, Ole Miss is number 16, even after throttling Georgia last week. So I took a lot of heat for that, but that's what we're talking. Like, that's the difference. That's what we're talking about.
Context. You said something there that I think is very important. I got yelled at by someone on TikTok. I don't even know how someone on TikTok yells at people. I got to learn about the future. All right, let's do your resume rankings now. Your top 12 of your resume rankings. 1 is Oregon, 2 is BYU, 3 is Indiana, 4 is Texas, 5 is Tennessee, 6 is Army, 7 is Ohio State, 8 is Georgia, 9 is Notre Dame, 10 is Miami, 11 is Penn State, and 12 is Alabama. So these are some of these. Now, again, I think the point of this is, we'll get to your blended in a second. These feel more like rankings, but there are still things here that don't match up with the rankings, that BYU and Indiana are ahead of Ohio State, right? So again, this 2 opposite ends of the spectrum, which is why these resume rankings and the power poll are pretty different.
Yeah, and I do penalize teams. Like I said, it's a 7-point resume penalty for a loss. So I do penalize teams pretty heavily for losing. But I also didn't want it to just be, okay, let's do all the undefeated teams and then all the one loss. I don't want to do that either, because I don't think that's correct either. So you see here, like Army undefeated number 6, and then Ohio State behind them at number 7. Like, I don't know that anybody thinks Army's better than Ohio State, but they're undefeated against their schedule, and Ohio State has a loss like that. I think that has to matter in a resume.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And again, especially when you're putting it into a thing, it's like, you're putting the numbers in, and they don't. A resume ranking. Does your resume ranking know how close the loss was?
No, not in the resume rankings. That is factored into the power rating, which then gets factored into the strength of schedule. So like, kind of, but not directly.
Yeah,
not directly.
Yeah. Okay, so right, there's some stuff here that, like, okay, well, this has Oregon back at number 1. It moves Notre Dame down to where it is in the rankings. And again, like I'm using the rankings, like the AP poll right now as a default. I'm not saying the AP poll is right either. Like I'm not saying any single thing is right. It's about the context. Let's get to your blended rankings, which is a combination of your power poll and your resume rankings to just have a final opinion on this. And now we're sort of back to very familiar kind of things. Oregon 1, Ohio State 2, Notre Dame 3, Indiana 4, Alabama 5, Georgia 6, Texas 7, Tennessee 8, Ole Miss 9. I just read 5 SEC team names in a row, and my heart almost stopped.
I was waiting for it.
Penn State 10, Army 11, Miami 12. So, for instance, we do have Indiana in here. We don't have BYU in here, and we have Notre Dame higher than the polls do. But otherwise, this feels pretty familiar. If you were an AP voter, would you just vote your blended rankings? Or if you were on the committee, would you bring your blended rankings in and say, this is what I think?
I think that would be my starting point. I would totally understand, again, going back to Notre Dame, like they have the worst loss of any of these teams. So if you want to ding them more substantially for that, I would not blame you at all. So I would maybe move Notre Dame down at least a spot. I'm not as familiar off the top of my head with Alabama's results, but I would probably move Indiana above Notre Dame and then go from there. But that's really the only one I would quibble with. I mean, I don't know that anyone has a problem with Oregon 1, Ohio State 2 at this point.
Yeah. So okay, so when the way our sport is operating right now, from your view, think the playoff committee, the fact that they exist and make the decision and the way they've gone about their business so far, you think is pretty good, okay, should be better, or bad?
I mean, I think the results have been pretty good. I obviously, you know more about the process than I did. You were on the mock committee. So I don't know as much about the process. Like, I don't know if they're looking at the power rating type metrics to even have that, or if they just want to completely tune that out. So I'm not sure about the process. I think the results though, like 98% of the time have been pretty solid. Like it's tough to quibble with it.
Okay. So again, we just want to provide some context here. I don't think we're going to do like every Tuesday do rankings talk, but I wanted to bring in, somebody like you with a bit of a Vegas eye, somebody like Brian last week, just get some context here because it really does matter. And it's going to get more difficult as we go through this. So, and plus I wanted to expose, T-Shoe to the world. If you're not watching or listening to the Friday betting show, this is the kind of insight that you get. And then I shout, but we're also winning money. We're like up $1,600 for the year from a $5,000 bankroll, T-Shoe. So like whatever we're doing, it works.
It is working. There's definitely shouting. It definitely works. Come for the orange team parlays and, stay for the winning money.
We are up $1,599.26 from a beginning $5,000 bankroll. So we'll take it. So T-Shoe, we'll see you back. His full name's Tyler Shoemaker. I call him T-Shoe. We'll see him back on the Friday betting show. But thank you for helping us try to figure this out right now, Tyler.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me.
I just called you Tyler there at the end to try to sound professional on the Tuesday show, and it felt like nails on the chalkboard. What am I doing? You're T-Shoe. All right. He's T-Shoe. I'm Doug Lesmerises. When we come back, Dan Wetzel will join us on Kings of the North. Back on Kings of the North, joined as we are every Tuesday by Dan Wetzel from Yahoo Sports. Dan, dude, good to see you as always.
You?
We're talking Deion Sanders and Kirby Smart today. Is that okay with you? They're two famous guys, just like us. We're two famous guys talking about two famous guys.
Yeah, I think so. Which one's Prime and which one's Kirby?
Yeah. I think we know which one's Kirby,
cool.
Unfortunately.
I think I'm Kirby. You're Prime.
I don't know. I don't know. Does this look like Prime to you? This is not a Prime vibe.
No. I could definitely rock the visor, though, and probably pull Kirby off, a little bit better. Yeah, Prime's in his own. I mean, he's Prime. He's been the coolest guy I've known since I ever learned about him.
So I was Paul Feinbaum for part of Halloween. I don't know if you caught that.
Actually, I did see that. Yeah.
But I was thinking about trying to do a Kirby Smart costume, and I didn't quite get there. Did you do a Deion book for your kids learn about famous athletes series?
No, this is the second person to ask me today about that. Now, I want to do like a Legends. We do current ones, but I want to do like a Legends, like Michael Jordan, Jackie Robinson, stuff like that. And Coach Prime could fit in there because he's now part. I think it's pretty cool. Most 11-year-olds, though, they're more interested in Lionel Messi or Steph Curry or Clark coming out in the spring.
Yeah.
Pre-orders in. Yeah.
But you did write about Deion Sanders a couple weeks ago.
I have written a lot about him. Yes.
Yeah. So the context here I want to talk about, I just wanted to, I think it's a little bit, it's two different ways of going about your business. And obviously in their different ways, very successful in college football in the modern day. Kirby Smart at Georgia and Deion Sanders at Colorado. I want to start with Deion Sanders, though, Dan, because everybody knows that Colorado is right in the thick of the Big 12 race right now. But months ago, it was mostly people were not feeling it from Colorado, especially the media, with their completely turning over the roster, the way Deion Sanders was handling the transfer portal. Just a lot of people, I think, thought maybe they were more hype than substance, and they kind of were waiting for him to fall. And here they are now. How surprised are you by how good Colorado has been, and how surprised are you by Deion Sanders turning over a completely destitute college football team in 2 years?
So, context on that, I'm surprised they're this good. I was not surprised that he would be successful. I've said it repeatedly when discussing Deion Sanders. Are you betting against this guy?
Right.
He's always successful. Okay. 2, there's a lot of different ways that things work, and you never know whether a coach is going to make it work or not until it happens. We have seen the most obvious hires that should totally work, not work. Like Scott Frost going 13-0 at Central Florida and then returning to his alma mater at Nebraska. And you go, all right, this is going to work. And then it doesn't work. Right. And then you say, well, they fired a Bowden down at Clemson. They're going to hire this offensive former receiver coach with these over ambitious and excitable with a weird name no one can pronounce. And Dabo Swinney goes and turns Clemson into from a underperforming giant to 2-time national. So you just don't know. So Deion Sanders was going to do it his way. And I was never, I would have liked, I was always like, I'd like to see him work the high school ranks a little more, because I think he would get more truly elite players. Because when he shows up at your high school for a visit, it's going to be a thing. And if Nick Saban and Kirby Smart and these guys could go out, I would have liked to see, I'd still like to see Deion take 10 recruiting visits a year or something. But he had a system. Let's see. Are you better off just grabbing juniors who can play? And he created a lot of excitement. You have to remember, he took over a 1-11 team. That wasn't just 1-11. Those 11 losses the year before he showed up at Colorado were by 32.4 points a game. They were horrible. This is one of the worst teams you'll ever see. So even getting to 4 wins, they blew this Stanford game. They should have had 5 last year. I was like, that is progress. Let's see. Now we're talking about, and I get it. There's a lot of hype. There was attention, unearned, all this stuff. There's a DJ in the locker room. There's celebrities. I ain't hard to find. My Louis, all the bit. But now we're talking Colorado, not because of what Deion Sanders is saying or doing off the field. We're talking about them because they have a clear path. They control their destiny to get into the playoff. They got 3 games left. They're going to be favored in all of them. They get to the Big 12 championship game. You win that, and you're sitting there taking a bye in the first round. So it is proof of concept is here. Did I think they get to this point? No. But did I think he could be successful? Yes.
There's 2 points I want to ask, whether we think this is replicable for other college football programs. And obviously Deion in many, 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 many ways is unique. And if you try to be like Deion, you're going to fail. But the first thing I want to ask is about roster management. And I've fallen into really looking at the top 30 guys on every program. I just go to PFF and I look at the top 30 guys in number of snaps. How much have you played? It's like it's your first team and half your second team, right? So it's the guys that play that matters. It's at this point in the season, it's about 200 snaps. that you have played to be in the top 30. I looked at Colorado's top 30 right now.
How many snaps does Travis Hunter have? 800?
Well, it's one of those, like, do I count Travis Hunter as 2 people, as 3 people, as 5 people?
He's got like 700 snaps, yeah.
So I only counted him as 1, which actually threw off the count a little bit.
Yeah.
But of those 30, the 30 guys who have played the most for Colorado, do you want to guess how many came to Colorado straight from high school without transferring in from another program of the 30?
6.
4.
Okay.
2 freshmen and 2 sophomores.
Yeah.
There are 14 players who transferred in this season. There are 12 players who transferred in last season and now are in year 2 at Colorado. And some of the guys who came, like Jordan Seaton, the true freshman left tackle, who was a 5-star and a huge get, he's one of them, right? He's one of the freshmen of the 4. So it is completely transfers. It is completely transfers. Some of the guys are from Jackson State that came with him, like Travis Hunter and his sons. But then there are a bunch of other guys. I mean, you can run through the teams they got guys from for this year that are playing: Oklahoma State, Liberty, Charlotte, Arizona State, Pitt, Houston, Auburn, Indiana, Florida International, Vanderbilt, Florida Atlantic, UTEP, Arkansas, Ohio State. It is not like this is a lot of guys. There are guys here. You're kidding me? You're getting guys from Florida Atlantic and Florida International and UTEP and Houston and Charlotte and Liberty. Guys like that, a lot of schools could get guys like that. So he is not going and taking Alabama's roster. So it's a very interesting conversation, Dan, because coaches, everybody knows how much the portal can impact you. And it's just a matter of degrees now. Everybody needs the portal, but how much do you want to use it? Is this a message to anybody of flip your team in 2 years, portal, 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 don't worry about the high schools? Can another program try this?
Indiana did.
Worked.
I mean, Indiana's working. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But absolutely, look at Indiana's roster. They're not. They didn't go out and get a bunch of kids from Alabama and Georgia. They got a bunch of kids from James Madison and the Sun Belt and the MAC, right?
Yep.
Curtis Rourke is from Ohio.
Yep.
Anybody could have had him. The kid's really good. So absolutely, this is the way. And this was his. I remember talking to him at the Super Bowl after he just got the job.
Okay.
He was down doing Radio Row, and it was like the fanfare was incredible. Like I remember, like there was like Michael Strahan like bolted across, and I don't know if you've ever been to Radio Row at the Super Bowl, but it's a massive convention center, like ballroom, like convention center room. It is chaotic. Like I remember Michael Strahan coming across the room just to say hi to Deion Sanders. And it was like, even the Hall of Famers, he's the Hall of Famer, right?
Yes.
Like even amongst that group, he's something else. And he's like, look, I can get kids that have already developed. They already put on the weight. I know they can work. I can do it. Those two defensive linemen, including Samuel Okunlola, I think it is.
Yep.
From Pitt, they're really good players.
Yep.
Like those guys they're having huge, and that defensive line that he's put together, they had 7 sacks against Texas Tech, and they had 7 earlier in the year, I think, against Arizona. Like this defensive line is really good. It's not just Shador. Sure, he's a great player. Travis Hunter is something other, they've got 3 of the best players in the country, and there's only 2 bodies. Okay. Right. I mean, this kid's incredible too, but it's also these other guys that are coming along. So absolutely you can do it. Not only can you should. And if you don't, look at this route of saying, hey, I can get better players this way, then I think you're doing a disservice unless you are even if you are a certain level of program. But the days of college football is dominated by 3 or 4 or 6 teams that can load up on top 5 recruiting classes. And that's what it was. It was Georgia. It was Alabama. It was Ohio State. It was LSU. It was Clemson. Those types of schools only that could just load up year after year and build that incredible depth of talent. And it didn't matter. You brought in 23 guys. As you said, you need 30 players a year. So if 8 of them pan out each year, you're good. Yep. Or, maybe a little bit more for your older players. That is no longer that's not what's going to work. And so places like Colorado, places like Indiana, places like BYU, look at all over this thing. SMU rolled their roster. You can win. You can get talented enough to win. And that's the parity we are seeing. And that is, I know fans, and coaches really just decry the portal, and they decry and it was all framed wrong. If you're a fan of college football of a team, other than, well, I wish I was still Alabama and I got the #1 recruiting class every single year and we always won. If you're other than those couple schools, the portal is fantastic. The portal's the best thing that has happened. And look at what Deion Sanders, who took a 1-win team, is now selling out every week and playing for a playoff.
So I'm going to use a strange word for college football, which is fair. So the thing that I've wondered about the portal sometimes is it fair? And I want to ask you 2 fair questions. One is it fair to the programs that develop these guys and bring these guys in as high school players and help them get better? And then maybe they've started to help your program, or they're about to help your program, and then they leave. And they go to Deion, and Deion gets the finished product, but the school that helped build the guy up, like what do they get out of it? But I'll look at some of the, these are the most high, again, we're not talking about Georgia guys here at Colorado. These are the most high profile schools that got Colorado took from this year. Okay. Vanderbilt, they're okay. Mm-hmm. Indiana, they're okay. Mm-hmm. Arkansas, they beat Tennessee. They're okay. Arizona State, they're okay. Pitt, they're okay. Like, there's part of me that, like you mentioned Oklahoma, they also got Dalen Hayes. It was like a big deal when he left Pitt. And it's like, he's not even in the top 30 for snaps right now at Colorado. But like, there are some of these things that I think, man, like that was some of those moves for Pitt, for example. I was like, that is a tough blow for Pitt. They're fine. So that is part of it.
Eli Holstein out of Alabama. The portal, give it and take it away. Right.
So do I, naive old man, oh man, they put a lot of resources into those young kids and then they lost them. Is that dead? That it's not fair to develop now, especially it can be tougher for the G5 teams. You're talking about the Ohio quarterback is driving Indiana to the playoff. But what has been fair to MAC teams in the last 25 years of college football?
100 years.
From a team perspective, is it meaningless, the word fair, when it comes to programs right now?
Doug, you're a parent. What do you say to your kids? Life's not fair.
Fair. Yeah. Okay.
Fair. What is fair? I don't, right. There's no fair here. It's the first thing you learn as a parent, and you go, damn it, that's what my father said to me.
No.
And I hated that phrase, but it is true. Is it fair? No. But at the same time, is it fair to the player who maybe had the talent and the work ethic and wasn't seen?
Right.
And wasn't seen by the Big 10 or the Big 12 or whatever. And the only scholarship he could get was to a MAC school or a Sun Belt school or a Division II school. And then he worked and he showed out. And then he wants to live his dream of playing high major college football. Also, these kids come down. I said Eli Holstein did not play last year at Alabama. He did not want to wait another year. He said, I'm going to Pitt. I'm going to start. I'm going to play. It's worked out for Pitt last 2 games notwithstanding, right? So things happen. This is just how reality is. What college football is about and what the narratives of college football are driven by are coaches. Coaches are inherent complainers, okay? They're also extremely conservative. So they sit there. You can sit around with coaches. I know you have, and I have, and all they talk about are the recruits they lost.
Yeah.
I got cheated on this recruit. I had this kid, but his dad screwed me. The high school coach got hired as a summer, worked the camps and made too much. Whatever it is, they get screwed. They're inherently upset about what they lose. They never talk about what they go get. Right. And it's an entire sport built on the idea of standing on 16 in blackjack. Hell, they'll stand on 14 in blackjack and then go, I can't figure it out. Why did the dealer get 21 and I didn't? Because that's your 5, buddy. That was your 5. And you would have got it. You would have won. That is how they approach it. And so they complain. They're loud in interviews. They tell the fans, this is a terrible thing. The portal is terrible. This is horrible. They testify in front of Congress. They have their friends, the former coaches, who are all the real big name media, former players and coaches. They listen to these guys. This is terrible. This is terrible. The rich are going to get richer. Georgia's going to get everybody. Michigan's going to get everybody. These other schools will never be able to compete. Does it impact the level of play at the MAC? Probably. Now, they're also getting guys coming down again because some kids sitting in the Big 10. So probably. But when in the world did we ever sit around in this sport and go, what is best for the MAC?
Right. So that's not new.
I've missed this conversation. When has the MAC had a national title contender. What I like right now is we got like 30 teams going in. You know, there's a way, and I know it's Kings of the North, but there is a very simple way that the SEC could finish in an 8-way tie for the championship.
I know. And then they're going to put them all in the playoff.
They can all go 6-2. Yes. And it only requires like Missouri beating South Carolina and somebody upsetting Texas or Texas A&M, and then Texas, whoever gets upset winning the Texas A&M, and everyone is 6-2, and everyone else just wins their games. That parity in the SEC is great. What was the SEC for the last 15 years? Alabama and one other team each year. Maybe it was Florida under Meyer. Maybe it was LSU if they got Joe Burrow. Maybe it was Georgia. Other than that, it was just steamrolling through, and that was the sport. Everyone goes 12-0 again. Maybe there's an upset, but that's it. Now, who the heck knows? That is a good thing. The portal is become the best thing to happen to this sport. Deion Sanders saw it. Other guys saw it, but Deion Sanders saw it, turned it around, and said, "Why am I taking? I'm Colorado. I'm going to get 2 and 3-star recruits. Why don't I go get this kid who already put 30 pounds on, and I like him from Florida Atlantic or Pitt or wherever it is, and I can make a mesh." And all those old school, you can't build culture in a year. You don't get a chance to spend
Winning
all
helps.
this.
Yeah.
Culture's, I mean, look at that defensive line at Colorado. It is ferocious. Again, 7 sacks in 2 of the last 3 games.
Havoc. Absolute havoc. They're creating havoc for sure. So here's the other fair question. So the famous Deion speech, right? When he gets in there and he talks to the Colorado team in December of 2022 when he's hired, he says, "I'm bringing my luggage and it's Louis," right?
Mm-hmm.
The top 30 guys who are playing right now, there's nobody who is in that room.
Yeah.
There's one kid, the guy Hank Zelinskis, who's played center for them.
Mm-hmm.
He was committed to Colorado in June. He's the only, everybody else, there's 26 transfers. There's 2 true freshmen who committed to Deion, and there's a sophomore who committed to Colorado in December after Deion got there. There's one kid who plays for them who wanted to go to Colorado pre-Deion. All those other kids and people have done great reporting on what happened to all those Colorado players who were shoved out. Is there any conversation about fair to be had there? Because there was at some point. That was something people were very, I don't know if upset's the right word, but they were noting it. Is that conversation dead because it worked, or is there something to that still?
I think there's still something to that. It obviously worked. Okay. He undoubtedly did the right thing for the bottom line, which is win football games. I think it is a fair thing to discuss. Is that all this should be about?
Mm-hmm.
Could he have spent more time trying to develop? Like, did he have to come? I give Deion Sanders credit here. Those conversations usually occur in private between a coach and a player.
Yes.
And he filmed the damn thing and put it out.
Right.
Said, "I don't care." He took the heat for what cleaning house is. And in terms of should he have, maybe there's a couple guys. I still like to think that there's a place in a sport where there's 85 scholarship players and some extra, walk-ons, at least for now, where kids get a chance to look. I came in, you believed in me. I'm working hard. I'm trying to contribute, and I shouldn't be run off the team. I think that is something that's an ideal to go for, but that is an ideal. So I'm not going to sit there and say, nope, you should just crush everybody because it's working. It is undoubtedly working for Deion Sanders. It is working for Colorado, but I would like to see a little bit more. I'm not heartless.
Yeah.
I'm not heartless.
Well,
but at the end of the day, it was the worst team in the country.
Well, and that's one of those things. Like I was around the Cleveland Browns when they were going 1-31 in back-to-back years, and everybody was like, "Oh, this is like it's bad for the culture." I said, like, everybody who's here going 1-31, they're not going to be here if and when they turn it around. Like Myles Garrett is, but like nobody else is going to be here. It's not like you take the players who went 1-31 and just say, "Let's improve, everybody. Let's try harder. Let's work out a little bit harder. Let's eat an extra banana or an extra piece of broccoli every day, and everything will be fine." When you're very, very, very bad, the way you win is by getting new people and new players.
The great story of Major League Cleveland Indians, back when they were called the Indians.
Yeah.
Right? They only kept Roger Dorn.
Yeah.
And he came around, sort of. He came around. But it was the other guys. It was Willie Mays Hayes. It was the other guys that came in with the new attitude. It was Tom Berenger. What is it?
I'm going to ask
the guys. I can't remember.
Yeah, Tom Berenger.
They're getting guys out of the California Penal League, right?
Yeah.
That's what you needed. You needed the new guys. The new attitude.
Hank Zielinskis, whether he knows it or not, is the Roger Dorn of the Colorado Buffaloes because he was committed to them in June before Deion showed up. And we will tell him that, and he will say, who is Roger Dorn? And we will say, the guy Corbin Burnson played. And he will say, who is Corbin Burnson? We'll say, the guy from LA Law. And he will say, what is LA Law? We'll say it was a popular network TV drama. And he will say, what is network TV? So
what's a drama?
It's
like a long TikTok.
It is. So this is the other thing that's happening right now with Colorado is the recruiting experts, including a couple at On3, are predicting that Julian Lewis, who is a 5-star quarterback by the 24/7 composite ranking, is the number 31 player and the number 5 quarterback in this class. He's been committed to USC for a long time. He's continued to make visits and interact with teams. There's a little bit of Indiana stuff with him because he has previous existing relationships with some people on the Indiana staff. But now people are changing their recruiting predictions to say that Julian Lewis, as a 5-star quarterback, is going to flip to Colorado. And if that happens, this is sort of what you're talking about. If this is where Colorado gets, where kids just want to go play there, and maybe you add the depth in the portal. Listen, we're going to get our guards in the portal. We're not going to try to turn a 3-star recruit into a starting guard. We'll get some guy who's played 2 years somewhere else and have him come here. But now they got Jordan Seaton at left tackle. They start adding 5-star guys in high school recruiting. That could be really interesting if Deion Sanders stays there. If Deion Sanders doesn't follow Shadur and Shiloh and they go to the NFL, will he go to the NFL? I've said maybe this could be good for the North because Julian Lewis, again with his Indiana ties, if he flips away from USC, goes to Colorado, and then Deion leaves Colorado, then maybe Indiana can come in and get Julian Lewis. But just this idea, 2-combo question. It's what you're talking about. If they start getting some high school kids, do you think Deion is going to stay there?
You never want to predict the coach will stay. I don't believe he's going to go to the Cowboy. He has said a million times he doesn't want to coach NFL. I don't know that it would work for him in the NFL. Although as a columnist that also writes about the NFL, please give me Deion Sanders and Jerry Jones. I'm here for it. But I don't think so. I think he will stay. How about this with Juju Lewis? You want to talk about what the portal does? He's a top recruit.
Yep.
If you had said a kid has a choice between he's going to USC, but he might flip to either Colorado or Indiana, 2 years ago, you go, what in the world are you even talking about? Now you go, he should.
Yeah, right. That's actually the good move for him.
Why is he going to USC?
Right.
Go play for Colorado or for Indiana. That's how quick this can change. That's why every fan should be like, I love the portal because I can't get my program to be USC and be located in LA, or I can't get my program to be Ohio State or Alabama where we're going to get 5 stars. Just come in. I can become Indiana. I could become Colorado. We could do that. We get the right guy and the right thing. We can get hot. So I expect that. There was kind of a famous Instagram when he was on his visit. He was sitting on this throne. There was a throne and there was Shador and Juju, and then he's handing the keys. Shador's handing the keys. It was very, but yeah, I think Deion Sanders might look. I don't really want him to. I like how he's doing it. I believe in his system. I just think he can have a tremendous impact in high school recruiting if he just sits there and says, "I'm targeting these 10 guys." Every year he tends to flip a guy, and you need stars. You can't just do. Shador Sanders is tremendous football player. He is just playing great. And Travis Hunter is incredible. He's the former number 1 recruit in the country. Right. That he got to Jackson State. That's the charisma of Prime. That's the ability. Obviously he's going to get Shador. Okay. That was pretty easy. I don't know how he identified him. First scouted him early on. But you can convince a kid like Travis Hunter and he's just like, I'm going with him. I'm signing up and it's worked. Now you have proof of concept. You're bringing kids in and it's sold out. Now we're winning. I think he can do some damage even in a 10, 12 person recruiting class and he's going to get better transfers. Yeah. I mean, if you're in the transfer market. So very, very interesting very interesting case study and how this has turned out for him. I don't know whether they can win the final three and beat BYU or ever in the Big 12 title game and make the playoff. But the fact we're talking football with Colorado on whatever this is, November 12th, is amazing, because this was a horrific program 2 years ago.
He made staff changes, brought in a new defensive coordinator, like changed some, like made some important changes this offseason. Didn't just sit back and throw up his hands about how it went last year. So again, it's a super interesting thing. And he's on one end of the spectrum, and we can have a short conversation about Kirby Smart. The main thing about this is, again, this came out during the show yesterday, and we touched on it briefly, but they had the player at Georgia who was seen jumping around with some Ole Miss fans after Ole Miss stormed the field after beating Georgia. He says it was high school friends that he was surprised to see. That's not what he meant. He's had like a big apology for that. But Kirby Smart at his news conference yesterday called it just stupid, quote, just stupid, and said, what an idiot about the player. And it is one of those things where, like, I don't know that he's ever, and if he has, I apologize, but like, for all the real issues that Georgia has had with players off the field, I think that hit people's ears the wrong way in some respects, because it is a silly thing. But I think you could have made light of it and been like, well, I don't know, maybe he wants to transfer to Ole Miss, or like, we made him put on an Ole Miss jersey and run steps today, or whatever, like acknowledging that it was a silly thing a kid got caught up with that's a bad look, but like, whatever, instead of calling him an idiot or just stupid. But that's like what an old school, like Bear Bryant, I think, would say that was stupid and an idiot.
Oh yeah, you're running steps. Yeah.
It's just, what do we think of Kirby right now? And I'm not the person to have this conversation, which is why I want to have an unbiased view of somebody who covers the sport that doesn't just put on dog mentality hats. Is Kirby good for college football? Do we still need coaches like this saying that a kid who jumped around is stupid and an idiot? Or is the way of like the old hardcore coach, are we seeing it dissipate?
It's interesting. So I think that Kirby will what I know of Kirby Smart, I'm sure he regrets that. That was not a good comment. Okay, the kid made a mistake. It was weird. I mean, I'm baffled at the friends of his that ran up to him like, hey, like, don't you know they just lost a game?
Right.
Like, wouldn't you just be like, hey man, good to see you, whatever. It was 2 seconds. It's tough, man. Everything's on film now.
Yeah.
Right. Everything goes viral. Everything's the media. So some kid gets you on a cell phone jumping around for 2 seconds with somebody you hadn't seen, and you do it. All right. I do think if I'm Jake Pope, I would probably ask Ole Miss whether I could transfer, because I don't think he's got much of a future at Georgia. Okay?
Yeah.
He might be calling Coach Prime. I ain't hard to find.
Yeah.
Kirby Smart is good for college football. I just think he's different. He's old school. He's intense. His style works also, obviously. Yeah. It didn't work against Ole Miss, which also hit the portal hard last year. Also lost their best player to Ohio State in the portal. Yep. So Kirby Smart cares about his players. Kirby Smart has a winning environment and culture, and I can't just forget all of the positivity for a few years just because, well, they finally got beat by someone other than Alabama, and he made a bad comment. I was struck by he's an idiot. I don't think that's a good way to address anyone, let alone one of your players. When you know the emotions after a game are very tough, there's a field storming, there's a lot going on, and the kid made a mistake, whatever. Shouldn't have acted that way. I do wonder that, we talked on the College Football Inquirer about this on Sunday. Like Saturday, for a long time, the sport was dominated by very serious people who took football very, very seriously. Kirby Smart, Nick Saban, Urban Meyer worked himself to a heart attack. Like everything was 1 more inch, 1%, all this stuff, 365. Saturday was dominated by, as we said, Coach Prime, Lane Kiffin, and Kirk Cignetti. 3 of your more showman type. And I would posit that Dan Lanning, for all of his old school style, got some of that in him also. And Kalani
He
Sitake is about the nicest guy you'll ever meet.
Yeah.
And go ahead with Lanning. You can say
Dan Lanning is such a showman. He complained about Deion Sanders being a showman by being his own showman.
Right.
Complained about Deion Sanders being a showman, but he knew the cameras were there. He did the thing, like, when did he call the timeout to like watch fans leave a game? But he does have that.
There's a fake field goal this weekend that was like with a bunch of linemen. Like, there's a little more fun. We'll see where Dan Lanning
to the left tackle as a Wildcat quarterback for sure.
So there's some of that in Dan Lanning. And so I think there's others, but I wonder, right? So you see these guys, let's Kirk Cignetti, you come in, he's not grumbling like every other Indiana coach. I'm going to build it up slowly. He came in and was like, Michigan sucks. Purdue sucks. Michigan sucks. And Ohio State too.
Yeah.
And then 10-0 going to Columbus. And he said they sucked. Great. This is going to be great, right? He's not scared.
Right.
But awesome. So it's a different style. And I wonder whether, because of the ability to hit portal, does that change thing? If you're sitting there going, okay, so maybe you go, look at, I want to go to Georgia. If I'm on a portal and I'm sitting there saying I can go play for Lane Kiffin, I can go play for Deion Sanders, I can play for Kirby Smart, or I can play, look at, if I go to Georgia and follow the system you get in the league. That was always Saban's thing.
Yeah.
Just come here and do what I say. We'll max you out. If you're good enough, you're going to make the league. And he had proof of concept. But maybe you sit there and go, you know what, man, Colorado, it's nice up there. Pretty campus. We got a DJ in the locker room. Like, we're pumping. Prime, he's a little crazy, but he's hysterical, right? And there's a little bit of that different vibe than this, ultra intense. I don't know. I'm not going to write off Kirby Smart in Georgia quite yet. I think he's good for football. But I do think the times are changing a little bit.
Yeah.
And we'll see. At the end of the day, though, like, if you're not serious enough and you don't win, I just think what's the standard? I mean, does anyone think Colorado should win the national title? No. What they're doing is successful. I know this.
Yeah.
No one's having more fun than the Colorado and Indiana players right now.
Right. And that is the thing. But like, Ohio State and Georgia are in a different situation. Like, can they have that much fun? But you make a point about Lanning, because Lanning, as the number one team in the country with high expectations, not quite as high as Georgia and Ohio State, seems to be straddling the line between we're dominant, we win week after week, we make adjustments, we're smart about football, but we're also like having a good time while we're doing it. I really, and I think on Wednesday's show, we'll talk more about Dan Lanning. I do think there is a lot there. The thing that, I mean, again, I love the idea of letting them lose. You let them lose. This is the whole new world now. You can lose. But Kirby Smart, after that lost to Ole Miss, still was sort of like, well, what do you mean by that question? Like, arms crossed, kind of like, well, this is life in the SEC. Like, it was not, maybe there's a little room for like, hey, man, wow, that was a lot of fans out there. Lane finally got us. Tip of the cap. Like, just there's a way that I think you can relax in your, and maybe it's a lesson. It's not like Ryan Day was super relaxed about losing to Oregon. I mean, like, there's these guys that still at the very top feel on edge. There might be something to be learned by the context of now you can lose, it's allowed, and maybe just having a scooch more fun with your players, but also with your fan base. All these fan bases take cues. The more that you can't handle a loss, the more your fan base can't handle a loss. And if you come in and like say, hey, Lane, that's one, man. You got us. Can't wait to play again. Maybe your fan base will relax a little bit too. Maybe the Ohio State fan base would relax a little bit. If I don't know. Now we're asking.
Well, I do think there's a bit. Colorado got beat soundly by Nebraska.
They did.
And, he said I think he said literally that. They got us. Great environment. It's great being down here, all that. And they lost a tough game, a really close game to Kansas State. And the Hail Mary was kind of botched or something like that. And instead of like focusing on that, I think Deion Sanders shows up as an NFL player, right? You cannot be, even Belichick would coach harder after a win than a loss. You can't go undefeated. I mean, it doesn't say it's in the rule book. It doesn't say that you can, but you're not going to. And so, like, if you're an NFL coach, you need to know when to push the gas and the brakes, because if you go, hey man, we went 10-7, lost 7 times, we're 10-7, we're in the playoffs,
right?
And so you got to understand that, especially when you're not, these guys aren't dealing with stacked decks anymore. There was a time when you would go into a game. I remember there was an Alabama-Notre Dame playoff game. Alabama had 22 5-star recruits on its roster. Notre Dame had 2.
Yeah.
Right?
In the playoff.
In a playoff. Okay, now a 5-star recruit is generally about 30 a year. Imagine an NFL team with 22 first-round draft picks.
Right.
You're going to lose. Okay, she's not going to lose. And it was like, I don't know, I was like Derrick Henry leaped over a guy. Like, what are we doing? We're going to win. So that's a playoff game. And that was an unbeaten Notre Dame team. And you're just like, yeah, no, you don't have a chance. If you're those kind of schools, maybe you have to be like, I'm going to go crazy over the smallest detail because it is the tiniest thing that can separate. But it will wear a program out if you don't have those types of players in there with you. Saban found that type of kid. But if you're going to be Colorado, if you're going to be these other schools, you can't be like, we're doomed if we lose. I think Kirk Cignetti's going into Ohio State with the attitude of like, we're going to win. But if they lose, which I would predict they do, you can't sit there and be like, this season's a failure. You'd be like, hey, we can still make the play. I mean, like, whatever, man. We're here.
It is it's always interesting to me that like Nick Saban is on whatever it is, Verbo commercials now saying you can only take a 5-minute shower because everybody knows the shorthand for the greatest college football coach of all time is that he's a grumpy old curmudgeon.
Yep.
And like he cultivated that. It was natural, but he also like was that. And is that what the next, like Dan Lanning wouldn't make a commercial that is about being a grumpy old curmudgeon. They have Deion and Nick Saban doing commercials together because it's like the grumpy old curmudgeon and the cool, like more fun guy. And so I just like,
it works if you got the players. It works.
But you're saying,
but if you don't.
Right. That's the conversation that you and I end up having. And I think it's the most important cover that it's just changed. You can't expect to have those players. So if you're more likely to lose, if you're not going to be perfect, maybe everybody just needs to chill out a little bit. And maybe there are some lessons to be learned here from guys like Dan Lanning and Deion Sanders for some other coaches.
You look at like Spurrier, Bowden, like it did happen. Pete Carroll, right?
Yeah.
Like there were guys that were chill.
Yeah.
And still had incredible competition. They got the players. You have to get the players. Now, when you're recruiting a 16, 17-year-old kid, they want to be close to home. They want to be, they're heavily influenced by their peers. They want to go to the biggest program. It is brand, because it gives validation for who they are. So they all cluster in the same place. You see it even in just regular admissions for school, right? And this is where we're going. Oh my gosh, I got an Alabama offer. I'm taking it. They don't really think through. You're the third quarterback in this class.
Oh, right.
Okay.
No, I know.
And guess what? The other kids, and guess what? They're recruiting 2 more 5-stars next year. Like, they don't think that through. You get to 20. You don't really care whether your parents are around. Now you're looking for opportunity. You've learned a little about the world. This guy that was so charming in the living room really doesn't care about me. You know what? I'm going to go, the Cignetti guy, it seems, so I just think because recruiting now is 2 years later, the ones that maybe matter, you have just a totally different life perspective. And it's really, these kids are committing at 16, right? 17.
Yeah.
Now you're 20 and you're committing. That is a huge growth time. So it'll be interesting to see, but there's still a place for Kirby Smart. I just think there's also a place for some of these other guys. And I like that.
And we've talked a lot about like the hole that Saban left in the sport, the grumpification of college football coaches that we went from. The best program before Saban took over the sport was USC and Snoop Dogg and Will Ferrell World Practice. Right. And then Nick Saban came in and started lifting national title trophies with a frown on his face. And I think a lot of people took cues from that. Like, that's how you win. And you said like Urban Meyer was like so intense, he like drove himself crazy. Like that was what succeeded. Does that mean that's what you must do to succeed? That's different. Then that's what happened to succeed with those guys. So I wonder if we get a little bit removed from Saban and you have these other guys, could that have an effect on everybody a little bit? I like the
diversification of personality, right?
Yes.
I like that there's a whole bunch of different schools and a whole bunch of different guys to root for. I always like that in college. I always thought college basketball coaches were more fun than college football coaches because of that. You had all sorts of characters in college basketball. And I always thought that as a group, they were more intriguing than than the football guys. And now maybe we swing a little bit. So I think there's a lot of ways to do this, and you're seeing it in the rankings and who's having success.
And by the way, Kurt Cignetti is a former Nick Saban assistant, but he came in and said Purdue and Ohio State suck. So it's like you can take a cue but still be your own guy. All right. He's Dan Wetzel. Catch him on the College Football Inquirer. Read him at Yahoo Sports and find him every Tuesday here on Kings of the North. Dan, as always, a pleasure. Thanks for being here, man.
Awesome, Doug. Thank you.
We'll be back on KOTN right after this.
Bill Landis back here with your block and punt of the week on Kings of the North. We're going to start with the block, and we're going to Kansas and offensive lineman Bryce Cabledew. Kansas's offense was firing on all cylinders in an upset of Iowa State, including this touchdown run from Devin Neal early in that game. Watch the left tackle, Bryce Cabledew. He takes the defensive lineman for a ride, continues straining throughout the play, maybe gets away with a little shove in the back there, and then buries the defensive back for good measure. Here's the end zone view. Watch the left tackle again, drive. Get off that block, finish it off, take out another guy, touchdown Jayhawks. Great work there. Moving now to the punt of the week, where I will remind you that there is nothing in the rulebook that I created that says the punt of the week has to be an actual punt. So let's take a look at what the Oregon Ducks did this weekend against Maryland. Oregon head coach Dan Lanning says you play to win, so he dials up a fake punt really deep in his own territory on 4th and 3, up 21-10 against Maryland in the third quarter on Saturday. This snap goes to Jordan Birch. He's like a 300-pound defensive end. He's playing the shield for the Ducks on the punt team. He's done it all year, and he's a weapon. Look how he moves in space. Great balance, contact balance, right? We talk about that with ball carriers. How about we talk about it with a 300-pound defensive end? You snap the ball to a big man, you're going to get on block and punt of the week. Watch the sell from Ross James. The play doesn't work without this punter. Sell the actual punt, and then you get Jordan Birch loose into space. Huge conversion for the Ducks. We've got offensive linemen running people over and defensive linemen rumbling for 36 yards. What more could you ask for on block and punt of the week? I'm Bill Landis. Thanks so much for checking in for this week's edition. We'll see you next week with more blocks and more punts.
I think we have a perception on the show that like I'm the crazy one and Landis is like a ball talker, like center of gravity, keep us grounded a little bit. He just said the punt of the week doesn't have to be a punt, just so we know he's crazy too. So always love that feature every Tuesday. We also do Overrated Southern Team of the Week, and I'll do this very quickly because we did off the top. You kind of got my vibes on rankings and polls and all these things. The one thing I just want to note as I give Miami the Overrated Southern Team of the Week, good wins still matter more than bad losses. And so the teams like that are at the highest ranked that have had bad losses from the South, Tennessee then also has a win over Alabama, right? Alabama then also has a win over Georgia. Ole Miss now also has a win over Georgia. So they're balancing out. At least they have a balance to their bad losses. Like Notre Dame kind of qualifies here too. Notre Dame has the worst loss in the country, and their best win is Navy. So like as much as TSU has Notre Dame number 1 in his power poll, I think you could make an argument that Notre Dame at 8 is overrated, because I'm applying that argument to Miami at 12. If we're looking at it in this context, that Miami has now the loss to Georgia Tech, but like I don't know what their win is, and that's why this conversation has always been different than Miami and BYU, because BYU you point to 2 wins, you point to SMU, you point to Kansas State. So. Right. There's a lot of stuff with Miami inside the numbers that they've been really efficient, but where's their win? And I don't know where they're going to get it. So we just have to keep their great win. So you have to, and I do acknowledge this with the SEC discussion, and which is why it is complicated, because as good as their win might be, their loss is as bad or worse. But Miami just has this loss right now. So that's why Miami, I think you could make a case that Miami should be like significantly lower than 12, probably. So actually, I take that back. Notre Dame beat Texas A&M. I'm saying, what's Notre Dame's win? Notre Dame has the ranked win. Miami is the highest ranked team with a terrible loss. I apologize to Notre Dame. Look at the banner. Well, it's over here. Sorry, look at that. I was doing the Irish dirty there for a minute because I forgot about the Texas A&M win at the beginning. Miami's the highest ranked team with a terrible loss that doesn't have a good win. Oh, I feel so justified now. Oh, wipe all the Notre Dame stuff. Miami just is overrated on its face. They're overrated. Oh, God, I'm so happy that I got there. Miami is totally overrated. Couple news items before we leave. Producer Mike, you can come in on this because you found this. We were just intrigued by this. Fran Brown, the Syracuse coach, said after a loss, he doesn't shower because he, quote, doesn't deserve soap. Winners get washed. Losers have to wait a little bit. So he doesn't shower until the next morning. And it's bad enough that he said his wife will not sleep in the same bed with him after that. Like, is this like a testament to how Fran Brown, how serious he is about winning, Mike? Or when you first saw this, were you like, what is going on here?
Yeah, no, when I first saw it, I thought that was psychotic. Yeah, I thought that was a little bit psychotic, which we just talked about with Dan. I mean, that might be a good thing to be a college football coach, is to be a little psychotic. But I mean, that's just, I mean, that's
hardcore,
tough.
Brother.
Yeah, that's tough. I mean, good for his wife though to really lay down the law. Like, she's not dealing with that.
But I guess also it's like, I don't know, he didn't play. So you shower in the morning, you go coach a college football game. I mean, I guess you get a little bit sweaty, but I don't always, like, sometimes if I go for a walk, because I don't really run anymore. I wish I still did, but I do like a nice brisk walk now. And I get a little sweaty. Sometimes I shower when I come home, but not always. So I don't know. I think I can see my way toward it. But the thing, Mike, that we're saying, and when you bring up the conversation with Dan, there's a lot with Fran Brown that I like because he's doing it his own way. I like that he talks about the way he talks about opponents. I like the way he's like genuine, I think, in the way he talks about players. I think he's building a lot of things there without trying to be. Obviously, he went down and worked for Kirby Smart at Georgia. He got this job at Syracuse from Georgia, but I don't think he's trying to be Kirby Smart, even though he acknowledges Kirby Smart was a big influence on him. He owes one of his early guys that really helped him in his career was Matt Rule, but I don't think he's trying to be Matt Rule. So maybe we'll chalk it up to that, Mike. Can we agree on, like, maybe it's just Fran Brown doing his own thing and we admire that? Can we get there?
Yeah, okay. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's probably not the way I would live or choose to live, but I mean, hey, everyone's entitled to their own opinions and what they want to do. Like I said, I'm just glad his wife is laying down the law, because I couldn't imagine if my wife, if I didn't shower and try to climb into bed, she would be like, you were sleeping outside.
Yeah. No, that's probably too. So I think all around, maybe we can acknowledge that the Brown family is handling their business in a good way. The last thing we want to talk about is news today on this Tuesday that Bill O'Brien announces that they're going to make a quarterback switch at Boston College. And this is super interesting because we've kind of been monitoring this all year with Thomas Castellanos, who was so dynamic in a lot of ways last year for Boston College, ran for over 1,100 yards last year, 5.2 yards a carry, had 215 rushing yards for Boston College last year. We thought, okay, Bill O'Brien coming in here. Again, I was at Boston College in spring practice. Bill and I talked about this a lot. Would he maybe go to Grayson James, who's the transfer from Florida International, who has 10 career starts at Florida International, is a bigger guy, is a little bit more of a classic drop back passer, even though he's not an entirely classic drop back passer. But Thomas Castellanos is just more of a little guy who will run around a little bit, right? Maybe more of a Johnny Manziel type. And so what actually happened while Boston College was succeeding early in the year is that they just sort of turned Thomas Castellanos, Bill O'Brien, and the staff into more of a passing quarterback. Again, he had 215 carries last year. He only has 93 so far this year. He only has 194 rushing yards so far this year. He's only averaging 2.1 yards per carry. And Bill and I had conversations on this show. Bill really wanted to see Thomas Castellanos run more. And so after he ran against Florida State in the opener and their upset win. And it turns out Florida State stinks. And then he ran against Virginia Tech, 20 carries for 58. He ran against Louisville, 15 for 43. And they were controlling that Louisville game for a while. But then this last week, they beat Syracuse. They ran the ball, but Thomas Castellanos wasn't part of it. He had 5 carries for negative 10 yards when you work in the sacks and that kind of thing. And then he was only 2 of 7 passing for 14 yards with a touchdown and a kind of bad pick. And they went to Grayson James later in that game. And then Grayson James was kind of in there as Boston College was running the ball so effectively there with Kai Robichaux and Jordan McDonald. And now they've made a switch. And Bill O'Brien said that Thomas Castellanos is going to step away from the team. Quote, he's an awesome competitor. We have a lot of respect for Tommy. Obviously, he wasn't real thrilled with that. So he's taking a couple days away from the team. So I'll get back to you on that one, but Grayson James will be the starter. So it just felt like maybe they would get here, but I also think Boston College got caught a little bit in between, and this has been an ongoing conversation. I think Bill and I, there's just too much going on during the season. We'll have to look back on this and find the teams that found the most effective way to work in the run game with their quarterback. And some teams we've seen, and we've talked about this with Avery Johnson, we've talked about it with Garrett Green, that maybe they're naturally running quarterbacks, but you're trying to evolve into something more. And if it doesn't work, you go back. It felt like maybe Boston College was trying to be something more with Thomas Castellanos, throw the ball a little more effectively. And if it wasn't working, like maybe go back. That's maybe why he did run a couple times the last couple of weeks. But then when you do that, you can't turn it over. And you have to be dynamic in the run game. So it's unfortunate. I wondered if it was a little bit of square peg, round hole with Bill O'Brien and Thomas Castellanos, just like the skill sets of what that head coach wants to coach from a quarterback and what that quarterback does best. This is just me theorizing. This feels like Thomas Castellanos very well might choose to be on another team next year, because I don't know what would get better about this fit. And I think he can be a really effective quarterback. He saved Boston College in a lot of ways last year. He wasn't even the starter at the beginning of the season last year. So this is an interesting move. I don't know if Grayson James is a long-term impact guy, but, you know, Bill O'Brien was really effective with Bryce Young, but Bryce Young didn't run much. Bryce Young's not a running quarterback, right? Christian Hackenberg at Penn State wasn't a running quarterback. These are guys who stood in the pocket and threw the ball. So it'll be interesting to see where Boston College gets as a program under Bill O'Brien, who I certainly think is going to be there a long time. He's an NFL quarterbacks coach. He coached Tom Brady. All right, doesn't mean you can find Tom Brady, but you look for a little bit more of that style. So this move is super interesting for right now as Boston College is trying to make a bowl game, but it's also interesting about what Boston College is going to do down the line and what's next for Thomas Castellanos. Boston College 5-4. And the thing we talked about that's so interesting, when we named Kai Robichaux like the guy who blew my mind this week, and I think he was like the ACC maybe Offensive Player of the Week, Boston College is going to SMU. 3:30 on Saturday. Huge in the ACC race. So what does this mean that this is what Boston College is getting to? It's possible that they will be more functional because, like, for instance, the Virginia Tech game, they Thomas Castellanos turned the ball over like crazy. They were moving it. They moved the ball effectively, but turned it over and didn't score and lost that game when otherwise a lot of parts of that game you would think, okay, they're in pretty good shape. Then against Syracuse, Syracuse has a much better success rate in that game. It's flipped. Like the team that was more successful more often didn't win because they popped some stuff in the run game and then they weren't turning it over at the end. So really matters for BC. And it really matters for this game on Saturday in Boston College versus North Carolina and versus Pitt at home. And they just need one win to get bowl eligible. Again, 6-6 a year ago. Bowl eligibility for Boston College would be great this year. So we like Thomas Castellanos. I think he can be good for somebody else, but it maybe is not a shock that it went this way at BC. Okay. The plan for Wednesday, and you make plans and then who knows, is Yogi Roth from Y Option. That's his Substack and his podcast. He's a Big Ten Network commentator, used to work for the Pac-12 Network, sort of came to the Big Ten along with these Pac-12 teams. He's going to join us, and we're going to talk a lot about Oregon. We said that we wanted to really dive in on Oregon and how Oregon is doing it, so we'll have part of that conversation with Yogi Roth, and Bill and I will get into it. The plan is to talk to an Army player tonight and have that interview on the show tomorrow. Army is off this week and then plays Notre Dame in 2 weeks. And it is also my plan to go to the Notre Dame Virginia game this week to get eyeballs on Notre Dame and talk to some Notre Dame fans about how they're feeling about this team that is sort of continuing again, has been very much a take care of business kind of team ever since the craziest loss of the year. So, and then what you watch and what you eat and what you're thinking, of course, on Wednesday. And then Thursday, breaking down a bunch of Northern games. So that's our plan. We always appreciate you guys being here. Thanks to T. Shue for jumping in and joining us on a Tuesday. Find us on the Friday Betting Show. Thanks to Dan Wetzel for joining us every Tuesday here on Kings of the North. Thanks to our producer, Mike Yarostowski, for making us look good and sound good. And thanks to you guys for being a part of it. Give us a thumb. Hit the subscribe button. Give us a review on Apple Podcasts. We just love to hear what you have to say about the show. For now, I'm Doug Lesmerises, and that was Kings of the North.